Good afternoon, boys and girls. It's lovely to be with you today. And I want to tell you a story. And I brought with me my piece of plastic. Now, it's always useful to have a piece of plastic with you when you tell a story. And what I want to do today is I want to tell you a story about a man who had 2 legs. Now, they weren't blue legs like this little pieces of plastic, but you might think it's not a very interesting story because most people have 2 legs. But the thing about this man was, he had 2 legs, but the problem was, his legs were the problem. You see, he couldn't walk. Now, we're not too sure whether he could never walk or whether he had an accident or something like that, but it meant that his legs didn't work. And so, what he used to do, whilst everybody else was running around, was he just had to sit down. Whilst everybody else would have been playing games as he was growing up, well, couldn't play any of those games. Now, it's not very nice today if you can't walk, but at least if you can't walk today, there are things that can help you, like wheelchairs and cars that are specially adapted to be able to get you around. Well, back at the time when this man lived, which was 2,000 years ago, they didn't have any of those things. In fact, probably what he used to do was he would sit on a mat by the side of the road underneath a tree. And as he sat on the side of the road underneath the tree, he would probably think about all the things that he couldn't do. Now, I don't know about you, but I think I would have got quite grumpy if I couldn't walk around. I'm sure there would have been times as he sat on his mat underneath the tree when he would wish that his legs would work like everybody else's legs, but it didn't seem like it was going to happen. I'm sure there were times when he would get angry, and so I'm sure there were times when he would pray to God and say, God, why has this happened to me? Why don't I have legs that work like everybody else? I'm sure there are times when you perhaps pray to God and wonder whether God does really answer your prayer. Well, I believe that he always hears our prayers, but he doesn't always answer them the way that we might think is best. But you know what? This man, whose name we don't know, but I'm going to call him Jake today, as he sat on his mat underneath the tree by the side of the roads, he has 4 friends. I don't know how many friends you've got. You might have a lot more than 4 friends. You might have 10, 20, 30 friends. But you know what? These 4 friends made a huge difference in this man's life. I can imagine him coming round to his house in the morning and saying, come on, Jake, get out of bed, because we've got to carry you on your mats down the road to sit you underneath your tree. They became Jake's legs. They would carry him and take him to places that without them, Jake wouldn't have been able to go. And I'm sure there were times when these 4 friends were possibly the only friends that Jake had, but they made a huge difference in Jake's life. Do you know what? Being a friend is a really important thing. And we can be a friend to other people. That perhaps sometimes when we're trying to choose our friends, we're thinking, what can my friend do for me? But I don't think these 4 friends thought that way. I think they thought, what could we do for Jake? Now, there's also another thing I'd like you to know, boys and girls, and that is there is a friend that he was even better than these 4 friends. And that's God. God wants to be our friend. He wants to help us in situations. And he understands whether things that don't work and things that aren't right, just like he understood how Jake must have felt when his legs didn't work. But you know what? God had put these 4 friends in Jake's life for a reason. You see, one day Jake was sitting by the side of the road on his mat underneath the tree when he noticed that there were lots and lots of pairs of legs that were walking past him. Now, they were attached to bodies, otherwise that would have been a bit weird. They did have bodies attached to them, but the first thing that Jake always noticed was people's legs. And on this particular day, his 4 friends were not around. They were off at work. They were doing all the things that they needed to do during the day. But Jake was sitting on his mat underneath the tree, wishing that his 4 friends were there, because he was thinking, where are all of these people going? Now, he knew there wasn't a football match on because they didn't do football matches 2,000 years ago. And he knew that it wasn't market day, and so he was wondering, why on earth are all of these people going past and my 4 friends are not here, so I'm stuck on my mat underneath the tree, and because I can't walk, I can't go anywhere. But what he did think was great news, because now at least some people might help me out. Because what he used to do when he sat underneath this tree on his mat was he used to beg. He used to ask people to help him. And some people were really kind, and they would put money in his hat or on his mat to help him out. There were some who weren't very kind, though. They would kick the dust in his face as he walked past. That's not very nice, is it? When people do unkind things. You know, it makes us sad, but it also makes God sad when we do unkind things to other people. And Jake, he was there thinking, I wish I could get up, I wish I could walk. And then he thought, hang on a minute, I'm going to ask someone where they're going. And so he said, excuse me guys, where are you all going today? They said, haven't you heard the news? Jesus is in town. I'm sure Jake would have heard about Jesus. Even though Jake was stuck on his mat underneath his tree, I'm sure his 4 friends, there would have been times when they told him about the amazing things that Jesus did, the amazing words that Jesus spoke, the amazing miracles that Jesus did. And Jake was thinking, oh, if only my 4 friends were here, then I could get to see Jesus for myself. But the problem was, he was stuck on his mat on the side of the road underneath his tree, thinking I'm not going anywhere. But the great news was, all of a sudden, his 4 friends turned up. They said, Jake, get ready. You've heard the news. Jesus is in town. We're going to get you to see Jesus, because you never know what might have happened. Because Jake knew that Jesus did amazing miracles. There were people who were blind could see after they met with Jesus. There were people who couldn't walk like Jake, who'd been able to walk when they met Jesus. And people with that terrible disease of leprosy, all of their leprosy would disappear when Jesus was around. And so, the 4 friends picked up Jake on his mat, and they started to carry him down the road. I don't know how comfortable his journey was that day. I don't suppose it was very comfortable, but he didn't really mind as they picked him up, and he started to go down the road as fast as they could. And off they went down the road, and the 4 friends carried Jake as fast as they could. When they got there, they saw where Jesus was. On this particular day, for some reason, he was inside of a house. Now that was a bit unusual for Jesus, because normally the crowds were so big he wouldn't go inside of a house. He'd be up on a hillside or sitting on a boat somewhere on the water. Perhaps whilst all of the people were sitting on the seashore watching him, but on this particular day, Jesus was inside of a house. And so when the 4 friends arrived outside of the house, the problem was the house was already full. You couldn't get anywhere near one of the doors to get through. You couldn't get anywhere near one of the windows to even look through. And so the 4 friends, they looked at the house and they looked at the problem, but they thought, we're not going to give up that easy. Because they wanted to get their friend to Jesus. And so what they did was this. They picked up their friend and they noticed by the side of the house there were some stairs on the side of the house. You might say that's a bit strange. Most houses these days have their stairs on the inside, but in hot countries still today, they have stairs on the outside of the houses so that you could climb up onto the roof. You see, the roof wasn't like that, it was like that. And so they climbed up onto the roof of the house, and if it had been like that, they'd have fallen off, so that wouldn't have been a very good idea. But they used the stairs to get on top of the house, and when they got onto the house which had a roof like that, not like that, they stood on top of the roof. And Jake was thinking, well, this is great. But now Jesus is underneath us, so it's not a very good place to be. But you know what? The 4 friends had already thought that. They thought, if we can't get through the door, if we can't get through the window, then we'll dig a hole through the roof of the house. And that's exactly what they began to do. They began to dig a hole inside, so on the roof, so that they could get through the house. Until eventually one of them was able to put his head through. Hello! And everybody now was looking up at Jake and his 4 friends and what they were doing on the roof. And I don't suppose anybody was taking too much notice of Jesus. But you know what? It didn't seem like he cared. It was almost like he was waiting for Jake to drop in, literally. Because that's exactly what they did. They got hold of Jake when the hole was big enough. They tied a rope around his mat with Jake inside of it, and they lowered him down through the roof until eventually Jake was there at the feet of Jesus, sitting on the floor. I can imagine Jake was probably a bit embarrassed. I can imagine everybody was now staring at Jake as he sat on his mat, and his 4 friends looking through the hole in the roof, and their friends and looking to see what Jesus would do next. And then, do you know what? Jesus said the strangest thing. In fact, the Bible says, first of all, he looked up at the hole in the ceiling and he saw the faith of the 4 friends. Do you know what? If it wasn't for those 4 friends, Jake would never have got there that day. But they had faith that Jesus could do something. You know, sometimes it's not about us, but it's about our friends, what they can do in our lives, because they knew that Jesus could do amazing things. That's why they brought their friend to Jesus. And if some of you love Jesus, you'll know what I mean. about bringing your friends to Jesus, because he's someone who can change anybody's life. And the 4 friends realised that. And so as Jake was sitting on his mat at the feet of Jesus, Jesus saw the faith of the 4 friends, and then he looked down at Jake. And then he said something even stranger. He said, Jake, I know all about the wrong things you've done. What? The 4 friends must have been looking at Jesus thinking, don't worry about what Jake's done wrong. The problem is that his legs don't work, Jesus. What you've got to do is you've got to sort out his legs and make them better. But you know what Jesus realised? That even more important than what Jake looked like on the outside was what Jake was like on the inside. And you know what? 2,000 years later, it's still true today. That God is more concerned about us on the inside than he is on the outside. You know, some of us, we spend a lot of time getting ready on the outside, don't we? We go into our bathrooms, we comb our hair, we put our makeup on, we put all of our fancy clothes on, and that's just the boys, let alone the girls. And then we think we're all right. But the truth is, God looks at the inside. He looks at our hearts. And he could see that there were wrong things in Jake's life, just as there are wrong things in all of our lives. In fact, Jesus used these words. He said, Jake, your sins are forgiven. What? Some of the people in that room, they didn't say anything, but you could see it in their eyes. They were really, really cross with Jesus. The 4 friends were looking down at Jesus thinking, what did Jesus just say? You see, they knew something. They knew that there was only one person could forgive you for the wrong things, the sins you've done, and that was God. What they didn't realise, boys and girls, was this. They didn't realise how special Jesus was. They didn't realise that actually Jesus was God, and that he came down to earth to show his love to us, and that's why he was saying these things to Jake, because he could. Because it was true. But Jesus didn't bother arguing with the people. He looked around, he said, I know what you're thinking. Only God can forgive people for the wrong things they've done. But I'm going to do something just as impossible. And so, as he said those words, the 4 friends were wondering what he was going to say next, when he said the thing that they'd been hoping they were going to hear that day. He looked down at Jake, and he said, Jake, get up and walk. As far as we know, Jake had never been able to walk in all of his life. And so you can imagine when he heard those words, what he must have felt. I don't know whether he felt a tingling in his legs. I don't know whether the muscles in his legs for the first time began to work, but something started to happen. And all of a sudden, Jake began to stand up on his own 2 feet. Probably for the first time in his whole life. He was probably a little bit wobbly at first. His legs probably weren't quite used to what he was feeling, but as he began to stand up on his feet, I can imagine his 4 friends up on the roof. They must have been thinking, this is amazing. They were probably looking through the hole they made in the roof. They were probably getting so excited they probably nearly even fell through the roof themselves. Good job they didn't, otherwise Jesus would have had to do some more miracles. But they didn't. They looked, and Jake, first of all, was standing up on his feet. Can you imagine what must have happened next? I can't imagine Jake walking over to Jesus and saying, oh, thank you very much. I can imagine him being so excited. Whoopee! This is amazing! My legs are working! And everybody in that room would have been so excited. They all would have been clapping and cheering. Perhaps apart from a few who were still thinking about those words that Jesus had said. It may be 2,000 years later, but it's still true today. That God can do a miracle on the inside of our life. And he forgives us for all the wrong things that we do. And he makes us a friend of God. And those 4 friends that day, they must have been so excited as they saw their friend Jake bend down, pick up his mat just like Jesus had asked him to, roll it up, put it underneath his arm. For the first time in his life, he walked out of that room a changed man. But not just changed on the outside, but changed in the inside too. And you know what? God is still in the business of changing people's lives today. And you might be someone who knows Jesus already. And you can be like those 4 friends and bring someone else to know Jesus. Or you might be like Jake today, with things on the outside, but even more importantly on the inside, that you need God's help with. And God can change your life too, because he loves you and he's got a plan for each of our lives.